was just about to leave my cramped city apartment when my phone buzzed violently on the kitchen counter. Caller ID flashed, Mom, and I hesitated, my hand hovering over the screen. Lorraine Brinley didn't call unless it was important or manipulative. With a sigh, I answered. Sawyer, you need to come home, she said, her voice uncharacteristically urgent. It's your father. I felt a mix of dread and disbelief. What about him? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He's not well. It's serious, she replied, a hint of something I couldn't quite place in her tone. Was it fear? Regret? I couldn't tell. Why are you calling me now? I asked, unable to hide the bitterness. The years of being the overlooked daughter had left their mark. Just come home, Sawyer. We need you here, she insisted before hanging up abruptly. I stood there, phone in hand, grappling with a flood of emotions. My name is Sawyer Brinley, and for most of my life, I've been the forgotten one. An urban planner by trade, I've always found solace in reshaping cities, making them better, more livable. It's ironic, really, fixing cities while my own family remained a mess I couldn't untangle. The drive back to my childhood home was a blur of memories and unresolved feelings. I hadn't been back in years, not since I had finally decided to carve out my own life away from the suffocating shadow of my younger sister, Tessa. She was always the star, the one who could do no wrong. I was just there. As I pulled into the driveway, the old house loomed large, a relic of my past. Lorraine stood at the door, arms crossed, her expression unreadable. I took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Sawyer, she greeted me, her eyes scanning my face for something, though I wasn't sure what. Come in. We need to talk. Inside, the house smelled the same, like old wood and faint lavender, a scent that always made me feel both comforted and trapped. My father, Henry, was in the living room, looking frilier than I remembered. His eyes lit up when he saw me, and I felt a pang of guilt for staying away so long. Dad, I said softly, sitting beside him. What's going on? He smiled weakly, reaching for my hand. It's good to see you, Sawyer. I've missed you. Lorraine hovered nearby, her presence a constant reminder of the tension that had driven me away. We'll discuss everything after dinner, she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. I nodded, feeling the weight of unspoken words pressing down on me. As we sat down to eat, I couldn't help but notice the empty chair where Tessa should have been. Was she avoiding me, or was there more to her absence? Dinner was a strained affair, filled with awkward silences and forced small talk. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was brewing beneath the surface, something that would change everything. Afterward, Lorraine ushered me into the study, closing the door behind us. There's something you need to know, she began, her voice low and serious. I braced myself, sensing the storm about to break. Whatever she was about to reveal, I knew it was only the beginning. As I looked into her eyes, I realized that this was more than just a family crisis. It was a reckoning. And I was right in the middle of it. The next morning, I woke to the sound of hushed voices drifting through the thin walls of my childhood home. I sat up, straining to hear. Lorraine and Tessa were in the kitchen, their conversation punctuated by the clinking of coffee cups. Can't believe he's doing this, Tessa's voice was sharp, a knife cutting through the morning calm. Just stay calm, Lorraine replied, her tone soothing yet firm. We'll handle Sawyer. She's not as strong as she thinks. I felt a familiar tightness in my chest. They were plotting, and I was the target. I got up and dressed quickly, determined to face whatever storm they were brewing head-on. Entering the kitchen, I was greeted by the sight of Tessa, impeccably dressed as always, her eyes narrowing slightly as she saw me. Lorraine offered a tight-lipped smile, her eyes darting between us. Good morning, I said, trying to keep my voice neutral. Morning, Tessa replied, her tone clipped. Mom and I were just discussing Dad's situation. Right, I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. What exactly is the situation? Lorraine cleared her throat, a signal that she was about to take charge. Your father has decided to make some changes to his will. For the sake of fairness, of course. Fairness, I echoed, my grip tightening around the mug. What does that mean? Tessa leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. He's leaving a significant portion of his savings to you, she said, her voice laced with disbelief. It's not exactly what we expected. I blinked, surprised. He's what? Don't act so shocked, Tessa said, her eyes flashing with something between anger and hurt. You've always been his favorite, even if you pretended otherwise. I laughed, a short, bitter sound. Favorite? That's news to me. Lorraine stepped in, her voice smooth as silk. We just want to make sure everything is handled properly, Sawyer. It's a lot to take in. I nodded slowly, understanding now the undercurrents I'd felt since arriving. This wasn't just about Dad's health, it was about control, about who would hold the reins of power once he was gone. I'll talk to Dad, I said, setting my mug down with a thud. I want to hear it from him. As I turned to leave, Tessa's voice stopped me. Just remember, Sawyer, things aren't always as simple as they seem. I paused, looking back at her. What's that supposed to mean? She shrugged, a small, knowing smile playing on her lips. You'll see. I found Dad in the study, surrounded by stacks of papers and old books. He looked up as I entered, a tired smile on his face. Sawyer, he said warmly. I was hoping we could talk. I sat down across from him, feeling the weight of the conversation we were about to have. Dad, Lorraine, and Tessa mentioned something about your will. He nodded, his expression serious. I've made some decisions, Sawyer. I want to make things right before it's too late. I watched him, trying to read the emotions flickering across his face. Why now? I asked softly. Because I've seen what happens when things are left unsaid, he replied, his voice tinged with regret. I don't want that for us. As we talked, I realized there was more to his decision than just money. It was about healing old wounds, about acknowledging the love and respect he had for me despite the years of distance. But even as I felt a sense of relief, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. Tessa's words echoed in my mind, a warning of the challenges yet to come. And as I left the study, I knew I had to be ready for whatever lay ahead. Tension in the house was palpable, like the charged air before a thunderstorm. I could feel it prickling at my skin as I moved through the rooms, each step echoing with the weight of unspoken words. After my conversation with Dad, I knew I had to brace myself for the fallout. The family gathered in the living room, a forced assembly orchestrated by Lorraine. Tessa sat across from me, her gaze fixed on some point beyond the room, while Lorraine perched on the edge of her seat, her fingers tapping a silent rhythm on the armrest. Henry wants to discuss his wishes, Lorraine announced, her voice carrying a note of authority that brooked no dissent. Dad cleared his throat, his voice a little stronger than it had been earlier. Thank you all for being here. I know this isn't easy, but it's important. I watched him, noting the way his hands trembled slightly as he spoke. Beside him, Lorraine was a study in controlled calm, but I could see the tension in her jaw, the way her eyes darted toward Tessa, seeking silent confirmation. I've decided to leave the majority of my savings to Sawyer, Dad continued, his words hanging in the air like a challenge. She's worked hard and deserves this chance. Tessa's reaction was instant. Her face flushed with anger, she shot to her feet. This is ridiculous, she spat, her voice cutting through the room. You're letting her manipulate you, Dad. I felt a surge of anger, but I held my tongue. This was Tessa's way, deflect, accuse, and never take responsibility. Lorraine reached out, placing a calming hand on Tessa's arm, but the damage was done. Manipulate? I echoed, unable to keep the disbelief from my voice. I haven't done anything except show up. Exactly, Tessa snapped, her eyes blazing. You show up after years of silence and suddenly you're the golden child? Dad's expression softened, a hint of sadness in his eyes. This isn't about favorites, Tessa. It's about doing what feels right. Lorraine's voice cut through the tension, smooth and practiced. We all want what's best for the family, Henry. But perhaps there's a way to reconsider this decision. Before Dad could respond, the door swung open and Nolan, Tessa's husband, walked in. His presence was unexpected, and the room shifted, the dynamics changing with his arrival. He looked around, taking in the scene with a practiced neutrality. "Sorry for interrupting," Nolan said, his voice calm and measured. "I just got back from a trip, and Tessa mentioned there was a family meeting." Tessa's eyes flicked to him, a silent plea for support. But Nolan's gaze settled on me, a flicker of something unreadable passing between us. "Maybe it's time we all took a step back," he suggested, his tone deliberately neutral. "Emotions are running high. Let's not make any decisions we might regret." His words seemed to diffuse the immediate tension, but I knew it was only temporary. Lorraine and Tessa weren't going to let this go easily, and Nolan's unexpected presence added a new layer to the unfolding drama. As the meeting dissolved into uneasy silence, I realized that this was just the beginning. Cracks in our family's foundation were widening, and I had to be ready for whatever came next. Path to justice was fraught with obstacles, and I was just beginning to understand the depth of the challenges ahead. The air in the house felt heavier after Nolan's arrival, as if his presence had stirred something long dormant. I found myself on edge, wary of what might come next. As I moved through the familiar rooms, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every step a reminder of the precarious balance holding our family together. Later that evening, I was in the kitchen, attempting to distract myself by preparing dinner. The rhythmic chopping of vegetables was soothing, a small act of control in a world that felt increasingly chaotic. Lorraine entered, her footsteps soft on the tile. "Need any help?" she asked, her voice deceptively casual. I shook my head, focusing on the task at hand. "I've got it." She lingered, her presence a silent pressure. "Sawyer, about earlier." I paused, knife hovering over the cutting board. "What about it?" She sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of years. "Your father's decision, it's not what we expected. But maybe it's for the best." Her words were carefully chosen, each one a calculated move in a game I hadn't agreed to play. "For the best," I repeated, turning to face her. "Or for your best." She met my gaze, her expression unreadable. "We all want what's best for Henry." I nodded slowly, understanding now that her definition of best was inherently self-serving. "And for you and Tessa?" Lorraine's eyes flickered, a brief crack in her composed facade. "We're a family, Sawyer. We should be working together, not against each other." "Funny," I said, resuming my chopping. "That's not how it feels." Her silence spoke volumes, and I knew then that any alliance she proposed was temporary, a bridge built on shifting sand. As the evening wore on, I retreated to the small room that had once been mine. I needed space to think, to process the tangled web of loyalties and betrayals that surrounded me. Quiet was a balm, and I found myself staring out the window, lost in thought. A soft knock at the door drew me back. It was Nolan, his expression serious as he stepped inside. "Can we talk?" he asked, his voice low. I nodded, gesturing for him to take a seat. "What's on your mind?" He hesitated, choosing his words with care. "I've been thinking about what's happening here. About Tessa and everything." I watched him, sensing the conflict beneath his calm exterior. "And..." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I don't know how much you know about Tessa's activities, but things aren't as straightforward as they seem." His words were a jolt, a confirmation of the suspicions that had been gnawing at me. "What do you mean?" Nolan sighed, his expression pained. "There are things I've discovered, things that could change everything." I felt a chill, the implications of his words settling over me like a shroud. "You're going to have to be more specific." He shook his head, a rueful smile on his lips. "Not yet. But soon. Just be careful, Sawyer. There's more at play than you realize." As he left, I sat in the dim room, the shadows lengthening around me. Nolan's warning echoed in my mind, a reminder that the ground beneath my feet was anything but solid. The stakes were higher than ever, and I was running out of time to uncover the truth. In that moment, I realized my quest for justice was no longer just about my father's wishes. It was about protecting myself from a storm that was rapidly approaching. The day of Dad's funeral dawned gray and somber, fitting for the weight of the occasion. I dressed in a simple black dress, the fabric feeling heavy against my skin, and prepared myself for the emotional gauntlet ahead. As I entered the living room, I found Lorraine and Tessa already there, their expressions a mix of feigned sorrow and underlying tension. "Are you ready?" Lorraine asked, her voice clipped, as if the question was more of a formality than genuine concern. I nodded, avoiding Tessa's gaze. The air between us was thick with unspoken accusations, a simmering cauldron of resentment that threatened to boil over at any moment. The service was a blur of condolences and whispered conversations, the weight of loss hanging heavy in the air. As the final words were spoken, I felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. Sadness for the father I had lost, and relief that the charade was almost over. But as we stood in the cemetery, the family gathered around the grave. Tessa's voice cut through the hushed murmurs. "Sawyer, where's my bracelet?" Her accusation hung in the air, a sharp blade poised to strike. I turned to her, confusion and disbelief warring within me. "What are you talking about?" "The bracelet you stole," she continued, her voice rising. "It was right here this morning, and now it's gone." I felt the eyes of the gathered mourners on me, a tide of judgment and suspicion. "I didn't take anything, Tessa," I said, my voice steady despite the anger building within me. Lorraine stepped forward, her expression one of practiced concern. "Perhaps we should discuss this later, Tessa." "This isn't the time." "No, it's exactly the time," Tessa insisted, her eyes locked on mine. "She's been waiting for a chance to ruin everything." The accusation stung, a reminder of the years spent in her shadow, always the villain in her narrative. I opened my mouth to respond, but Nolan's voice interrupted, calm and measured. "Let's not jump to conclusions," he said, stepping between us. "We'll sort this out later." Tessa shot him a look of betrayal, but his intervention seemed to defuse the immediate crisis. As the crowd began to disperse, Lorraine pulled me aside, her grip firm on my arm. "You need to fix this, Sawyer," she said, her voice low and urgent. "We can't have a scandal." I pulled away, anger flaring. "I didn't do anything, Lorraine. And I'm not going to play into whatever game you and Tessa are running." She watched me for a moment, her eyes calculating. "Just remember, Sawyer, family comes first. Always." I turned away, my mind racing. The accusation was a calculated move, a trap designed to discredit me when I was most vulnerable. But as I walked away, a new resolve took hold. I wouldn't let them win. Not this time. Back at the house, I called Eli Grant, the private investigator I'd heard about through a friend. His reputation for uncovering the truth was exactly what I needed. As I explained the situation, his voice on the other end was calm and reassuring. "I've dealt with cases like this before," he said. "We'll get to the bottom of it." Hanging up, I felt a flicker of hope. Path ahead was uncertain, fraught with challenges and betrayals, but I was no longer alone. With Eli's help, I would uncover the truth, no matter the cost. It was time to fight back, and I was ready. The days following the funeral were a relentless blur of tension and uncertainty. Eli Grant, the private investigator, had hit the ground running. We met in a small cafe on the outskirts of town, a neutral ground where we could speak freely without the suffocating presence of my family. Eli was a tall, unassuming man with a sharp gaze that missed nothing. "I've started digging into Tessa's activities," he said, sipping his coffee. "There's more to her story than meets the eye." I nodded, the weight of the situation pressing down on me. "What have you found?" He leaned in, lowering in and out of accounts that shouldn't be there. And a name keeps popping up, someone she's been meeting regularly. The implications were clear, but I needed more. "Who?" A man named Marcus, Eli replied. I'm still piecing it together, but it looks like they're more than just friends. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Tessa's betrayal ran deeper than I'd imagined, and the tangled web of deceit was more intricate than I'd feared. As Eli laid out the evidence, I felt the ground shift beneath me. The enormity of what I was up against was overwhelming. Tessa wasn't just trying to discredit me, she was hiding secrets that could ruin everything. Back at the house, I found myself pacing the small confines of my childhood room, the walls closing in with each step. The silence was oppressive, a constant reminder of the storm brewing outside. I needed to confront Tessa, but the thought of facing her manipulations head-on was daunting. That evening, Lorraine cornered me in the hallway, her eyes sharp and calculating. "Sawyer, we need to talk." I crossed my arms, bracing for whatever she was about to throw at me. "What now?" "There's been a development," she said, her voice smooth as silk. "Tessa has decided to press charges over the bracelet." The words hung in the air, a death knell to whatever hope I'd clung to. "She's what?" Lorraine's expression was unreadable, a mask of concern that barely hid the satisfaction beneath. "She believes it's the only way to resolve this." I felt the walls closing in, the weight of betrayal suffocating. "This is ridiculous," I said, my voice shaking with anger. "You know I didn't take it." "Perhaps," Lorraine replied, her tone infuriatingly calm. "But the evidence is in her favor." I stormed past her, my mind racing. The stakes had never been higher, and I was running out of options. As I retreated to the sanctuary of my room, I realized that the fight was far from over. Tessa had escalated the game, and I had no choice but to meet her head-on. Later, as I sat in the darkness, the pieces slowly fell into place. Tessa's affair, the missing bracelet, the financial discrepancies, everything was connected. And if I was going to clear my name, I needed to expose the truth, no matter the cost. With Eli's help, I would unravel the web of lies and deceit that had ensnared me. But as I stared into the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the battle ahead would test me in ways I'd never imagined. Path to justice was fraught with danger, but I was determined to see it through. The house was eerily quiet as I waited for the storm to break. Eli had gathered enough evidence to expose Tessa's affair and the intricate web of deceit she and Lorraine had spun. Now it was time to confront them. Nolan stood beside me in the living room, a silent ally in this unfolding drama. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low and steady. I nodded, feeling the weight of the moment. It's now or never. They need to know we're not backing down. Just then, the front door opened and Lorraine and Tessa entered, their conversation halting as they saw us. Tessa's eyes narrowed, suspicion flickering across her face. "What's going on?" she demanded, her voice sharp. I took a deep breath, stepping forward. "We need to talk. All of us." Lorraine's gaze flickered between us, her expression carefully neutral. "About what?" "About the truth," I replied, holding up a folder filled with Eli's findings. "About everything you've been hiding." Tessa's confidence wavered, a crack in her facade. "What are you talking about, Sawyer?" Nolan spoke up, his voice calm but firm. "We know about Marcus, Tessa. About the money. About the affair." Color drained from Tessa's face, and she glanced at Lorraine, searching for support. Lorraine's mask slipped, revealing a flash of panic before she regained control. "This is absurd," Lorraine said, her voice tight with anger. "You're trying to tear this family apart." I shook my head, feeling a surge of determination. "No, Lorraine. I'm trying to save it. But we can't move forward until everything is out in the open." Tessa's eyes blazed with fury, but there was a hint of desperation beneath. "You think you can just walk in here and ruin everything?" "I think it's time for the truth," I replied, meeting her gaze. "No more lies, Tessa. No more manipulation." The room was charged with tension, the air thick with the weight of unspoken words. Lorraine's composure cracked, her voice rising. "You're doing this for revenge, Sawyer. You've always wanted to see us fail." I took a step closer, my voice steady. I'm doing this for Dad. For the family he wanted us to be. But more than that, I'm doing it for myself. I won't be a pawn in your games anymore. Tessa's bravado faltered, and for a moment I saw the fear beneath the surface. What do you want? She asked, her voice almost a whisper. I want you to admit what you've done, I said, my heart pounding. And I want you to make it right. The silence stretched, and I could see the struggle playing out on Tessa's face. Finally, she looked at Lorraine, her voice trembling. Mom, I can't do this anymore. Lorraine's eyes widened, panic flaring. Tessa, don't. But Tessa shook her head, tears brimming in her eyes. I'm sorry, Sawyer. I didn't know how to stop. In that moment, the facade crumbled and the truth came pouring out. Tessa confessed to everything, the affair, the financial deceit, the plot to discredit me. Lorraine's control had unraveled, and the family she'd tried so hard to manipulate was slipping through her fingers. As the dust settled, I realized the confrontation had brought us to a crossroads. Path to justice had been painful, but it had also opened the door to healing. The themes of revenge and justice had intertwined, leading to a resolution that was both unexpected and transformative. With the truth finally out, I felt a sense of peace I hadn't known in years. The battle was over, but the journey toward reconciliation and rebuilding was just beginning. And as I looked around the room, I knew I was ready to face whatever came next. The dust had settled, but the echoes of the confrontation lingered in the air like a distant storm. Truth had been laid bare, and with it, the fragile facade of our family had shattered. Yet, amidst the wreckage, there was a sense of relief, a newfound clarity that came from finally facing the shadows head-on. In the days that followed, the house felt different, quieter, almost contemplative. Lorraine retreated into herself, the weight of her actions evident in her every step. Tessa, too, was subdued, her bravado replaced by a tentative vulnerability. Path to forgiveness was uncertain, but there was a glimmer of hope that perhaps in time we could rebuild. I spent my mornings in the garden, a place that had always offered solace. The act of tending to the plants, of nurturing life from the soil, was a reminder of the resilience of nature, and of myself. It was here that Nolan found me one afternoon, his presence a steady anchor amidst the chaos. How are you holding up? He asked, his voice gentle. I shrugged, a small smile tugging at my lips. Better, I think. Strange, but I feel lighter. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. You did the right thing, Sawyer. It took courage to stand up and face them. We stood in comfortable silence for a moment, the sun warm on our backs. I've been thinking about Dad, I said finally. About what he wanted for us. Nolan looked at me, a question in his gaze. And what do you think that was? I took a deep breath, the answer clear in my mind. He wanted us to be a family, to find a way back to each other despite everything. Nolan smiled, a soft, knowing smile. Then maybe that's where you start. Later, as I sorted through Dad's belongings, I found a letter tucked inside one of his favorite books. Paper was worn, the handwriting familiar and comforting. I unfolded it carefully, my heart pounding in anticipation. The words were simple yet profound, a message of love and regret, of hope for the future. Dad had seen the fractures in our family, and he had wanted more than anything for us to heal. His words were a balm, a reminder that even in our darkest moments there was light to be found. With the letter in hand, I made my way to the living room, where Lorraine and Tessa sat in quiet contemplation. I hesitated for a moment, then handed the letter to Lorraine. It's from Dad, I said softly. I think you both should read it. As they read, I watched their expressions shift, the words touching something deep within them. It was a small step, but a significant one, a chance for us to begin anew. As the day drew to a close, I stood at the window, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The journey had been long and fraught with challenges, but it had also been transformative. I had faced my fears, fought for justice, and in the process discovered a strength I hadn't known I possessed. The future was uncertain, but I was ready to embrace it. With my inheritance, I planned to fund community projects to give back in a way that honored Dad's legacy and reflected my own growth. It was a new beginning, a chance to make a difference. And as I turned away from the window, a sense of peace settled over me. The story wasn't over, but this chapter had come to a close. We had faced the storm, and now it was time to rebuild. Together.